Well, hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to another evening of Story Time with Sir Arminius. That's right. You come to your favorite English narrator for all of your narration needs for the land of Xanth and the source of magic. Or I'm maybe just, you know, practicing my accents because I can and need to, and it's a thing I do. Good evening, everybody. A very happy Tuesday to you all. That's right, it is Tuesday. It is story time. That means it's time for us to enjoy ourselves, just a little bit of The Source of Magic by Piers Anthony, because, you know, it's the source of magic. It was written by Piers Anthony, and we like to read it. Book number 2 of the Xanth series. Of course, I do stream on both Twitch and YouTube, for those of you guys who maybe didn't know. My Twitch channel will have ads that will run about every 30 minutes or so, 90 seconds worth of ads. My YouTube channel does not. So, obviously, I am happy for you to support me in whichever way works for you. If you'd like to continue to support me by staying on the Twitch channel, it helps to support my my streaming. It also helps to support Project New Hope, which, of course, we all appreciate. And if you would prefer to go and have it ad-free for your viewing enjoyment, you can always head on over to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius, and watch it with no commercial interruptions. Just do me a favor if you do so. Like the video, subscribe to the videos, comment on the videos. Do all of those fun things so that way I can continue to grow that channel as well. So, let's talk a little bit about what happened the last time. So, we had the search for the skeleton of Millie. And they found the skeleton of Millie. Turned out that it was a book. She had been transmuted into a book. And I say transmuted. Basically, it changed her form. It didn't actually change her, it changed her form. So when they took the book and they dumped it into healing elixir, she was returned to life. So yay, Millie is back alive. Bink was the one who found the book. Bink at the same time helped King Trent to figure out how he could copulate with his queen without sullying the memory of his wife. Yes, the queen is his wife now, but he had a wife and a son in Mundania who passed away, and they are the only ones he has in his mind that he will ever love, and he did not want to sully her memory, and was not sure that he could be potent with anybody that was not his wife. So, Bink came up with the idea of changing both the king and the queen. And by changing the both of them, they could do the deed and hopefully be able to produce an heir. Well, that done, the king helps Bink out in return and sends him on his quest for the source of magic. He provided him with 2 companions, Chester the Centaur and Crombie the Soldier. Crombie has been changed into a griffin to help facilitate the travel. Because Bink can ride the Centaur, but the Centaur can't carry 2 people. So now they have a griffin, nice fighting animal, great way to be able to help protect everybody out there. And he can fly on his own, keep up with the Centaur. Everything is great. Well, good evening to you, Fullerwhy Weisel. It is me, doing a recap of last week, which of course is available on the YouTube channel for those who didn't listen to it. So the 3 of them set off, and as they're traveling, they're using Crombie's ability to point out the best route to the Good Magician's castle, the Good Magician Humphrey. And of course, Crombie's ability points in a straight line. It does not point the most advantageous route. So they're running into some problems, and they end up running into a dragon. Well, they fight the dragon for a minute, realize that they probably can't beat it. They get a direction point out to be able to flee from the dragon. Where should we flee to? So they flee from the dragon, and turns out it was down into some chasms that were full of nickelpedes. They can't go forward. The dragon, is right behind them. Everybody is stuck. They end up making a truce with the dragon, saying, hey, look, we'll protect you. You back out. We'll all be good, hunky-dory, all together. Until they realize that the dragon is not built to be able to go backward. Well, that's a problem. So they end up having to go forward. They work together. They get out of the chasm. They make friends with the dragon. Yay. Dragon goes on its way. They go on their way. They were let out by a will-o-wisp, which brought them to the gravesite of Herman the Hermit, who was, of course, Chester's uncle. Yay! And that's where we leave off, coming into tonight's program. So everyone, sit back, relax, and prepare to enjoy as we get started into tonight's feature presentation of The Source of Magic. Chapter 4, Magician's Castle. Magician Humphrey's castle was the same as ever. It stood tall and slender, with stout outer ramparts and a high inner tower topped by embrasures and parapets and similar accoutrements normal to castles. It was smaller than Bink remembered, but he knew it had not changed. Perhaps the problem was that his memory of the ulterior made it larger than his memory of the exterior. With magic, it was possible that the inside really was larger than the outside. The magic access routes had been changed, however, and the hippocampus, or water horse, was gone from the moat. Its time of service expired. There was surely another creature standing guard inside, in lieu of the manticora Bink had known. the one at the anniversary party. Even monsters had to give a year of their lives as fee for the good magician's answers. And they normally performed as guardians of the castle. Humphrey did not appreciate casual intrusions. As they came to the moat, the nature of the new guardian became apparent. Monster? Monsters! The water teemed with serpentine loops, some white, some black, sliding past each other interminably. But where are the heads? The tails? Chester inquired, perplexed. All I see are coils. The three of them stood by the moat, pondering. What could a whole fleet of sea serpents have wanted to ask the good magician, needing his answer so badly that all were willing to pay the fee? How had they gotten here? It seemed it was not for Bink and his friends to know. Fortunately, this was not a hazard he had to brave. Bink was on the king's business, and would be admitted to the castle as soon as he made his presence known. "Magician Humphrey!" he called. There was no response from the castle. Doubtless the good magician was buried in a good book of magic, oblivious to outside proceedings. "Magician! It is Bink, on a mission for the king!" he called again. Still, no response. "The old gnome must be hard of hearing," Chester muttered. "Let me try." He cupped his hands before his mouth and bellowed, "Magician! Company!" The bellow echoed and re-echoed from the battlements, but the castle was silent. "He should be home," Bink said. "He never goes anywhere. Still, we can check. Crombie, where is the good magician?" The Griffin went through his act and pointed, directly toward the castle. "Must be beyond it," Chester said, "if your talon's not on the blink again." Crombie squawked, his fine hackle feathers rising again. He stood on his hind feet and made boxing motions with his front feet, challenging the centaur to fight. Chester seemed quite ready to oblige. "No, no!" Bink cried, diving between them. "We don't want to make a bad impression." "Hell, I wanted to make a good impression on his feathery face," Chester grumbled. Bink knew he had to separate the two combative creatures. "Go round to the other side of the castle and get another fix on the magician," he told Crombie. "Triangulate," Chester said. Triangulate? Bink, accustomed to his friend's surly manner, had forgotten how educated centaurs were. Triangulation was a magical means of locating something without going there directly. Chester had a good mind and a lot of background information, when he cared to let it show. The Griffin decided that the word was not, after all, a scatological insult, and flew to one side of the castle and pointed again. Toward the castle. No question about it, the magician was home. "Better fly in and notify him we're here," Bink said. "We don't want to mess with those moat monsters." Crombie took off again. There was a small landing area between the moat and the castle, but no opening in the wall. So the Griffin mounted to the high turrets. but there seemed to be no entry there for a creature of that size. So, after circling the tower twice, the griffin flew back. "I remember now," Bink said. "The windows are barred. A small bird can get through, but not a griffin. We'll just have to brave the moat after all."
"We're here on the king's business,"
Chester exclaimed angrily. His unhandsome face was excellent for scowling.
"We don't have to run the gauntlet."
Bink was piqued himself, but he knew he could make it through because of his talent. "It is my responsibility. I'll see if I can navigate the castle obstacles and get his attention. Then he'll let you in."
"We won't let you brave that moat alone,"
Chester protested, and Crombie squawked agreement. These two might have their rivalry, but they knew their ultimate loyalty. This was awkward. They had no magical protection. "I'd really rather do it alone," Bink said. "I am smaller than you and more likely to slip through. If I fall in the moat, you can lasso me and haul me out quickly. But I could never haul you out if—"
"Got a point,"
Chester admitted grudgingly.
"Crombie can fly across the water, but we already know he can't get in. Too bad he's not strong enough to fly with you."
Crombie started to bridle again, but Bink cut in quickly. "He could carry a rope to me in an emergency. I really think it is best this way. You can help me most by figuring out what type of monsters are in that moat. Is there anything in the Centaur's lexicon about headless serpents?"
"Some, but the coils don't match the pattern. They look more like pieces of a—"
Chester broke off, staring.
"It is. It's an Ouroboros."
"An Ouroboros?" Bink repeated blankly. "What's that? A fleet of sea monsters?"
"It is all one monster, a water dragon, clutching its own tail between its teeth. Half of it white, half black. The symbolism is—"
"But there are a score or more segments all over the moat. Some are in toward the castle, and some out near the edge. Look, there's 3 lined up parallel. They can't be pieces of the same monster."
"Yes, they can,"
Chester said wisely.
"The Ouroboros loops entirely around the castle."
"But that would account for only a single file line of—"
"Loops several times, and its head plunges below its own coils to catch the tail. A little like a Mobius strip, so—"
What?"
"Never mind. That's specialized magic. Take my word. That thing in the moat is all one monster. And it can't bite you because it won't let go of its tail. So if you're good at balancing, you can walk along it to the castle."
"But no segment shows above the water more than 5 feet. I'd fall in if I tried to jump from segment to segment."
"Don't jump,"
Chester said with unusual patience for him.
"Walk. Even coiled several times around the loop, the thing is too long for the moat, so it has to make vertical convolutions. These can never straighten out. As soon as one subsides, another must rise. And this happens in a progressive undulation. That's how the Ouroboros moves in this restricted locale. So, you need never get wet. Just follow one stage of the thing to the end.
This makes no sense to me, Bink said. You're speaking in Centaurese. Can't you simplify?
Just jump aboard the nearest sloop and stay there, Chester advised. You'll understand it once you do it.
You have more confidence in me than I do, Bink said dubiously. I hope you know what I'm doing.
I trusted you to get us out of the nickel-peed crevice Crombie got us into, Chester said. Now you trust me to get you across that moat. It isn't as if you've never ridden a monster before.
Squawk! Crombie cried, pointing a wing at the centaur. Bink smiled. He had been riding the centaur. Score one for the soldier.
Just don't fall off, Chester continued evenly. You'd get crushed by the coils.
Bink agreed, sobering. Even with his talent backing him up, he didn't like this. Walking the back of a moving sea monster? Why not walk the wings of a flying rock while he was at it? He cast his gaze about, as he tended to do when he sought some escape from what he knew he could not escape, and spotted another mound of dirt. Angrily, he marched a few paces and stepped on it, pressing it down. But when a convenient loop offered, Bink jumped across to it, windmilling his arms in the fashion of a mill tree to regain his balance. The segment of monster sank somewhat beneath his weight, then stabilized pneumatically. Though glistening with moisture, the white skin was not slippery. Good. Maybe this walk was possible after all. The flesh rippled. The section in front of him subsided into the water.
Turn about, Chester called from the bank. Stay with it.
Bink turned, windmilling again. There, before him, the loop was extending. He stepped along it, hurrying as the water lapped at his heels. This was like a magic highway, opening out ahead of him, closing behind him. Maybe that was the basic principle of such one-way paths. They were really the backs of monsters. Yet though the serpent seemed to be moving toward Bink's rear, the loop stayed in place, or drifted slightly forward. So he was walking fairly swiftly to make rather slow progress. I'll never get across this way, he complained. I'm not even walking toward the castle.
You'll get there, Chester called. Keep your feet moving.
Bink kept walking, and the centaur and griffin moved slowly around the moat to keep pace. Suddenly, a loop developed between him and his friends. Hey, I've crossed to an inner loop, and I never left this one, Bink exclaimed.
You're spiraling inward, Chester exclaimed. There is no other way to go. When you get to the inner bank, jump off.
Bink continued, rather enjoying it now that he had his sea legs and understood the mechanism. There was no way he could avoid reaching the other shore, so long as he kept his place here. Yet What an ingenious puzzle it was! Could he have solved it without Chester's help? Abruptly, the segment narrowed. He was coming to the end of the tail. Then the head of the Ouroboros came in sight, its teeth firmly clamped to the tail. Suddenly nervous again, Bink had no alternative but to tread on that head. Suppose it decided to let go the tail, just this once, and take him in instead. The big dragon eyes stared briefly at him, sending a chill through his body. Then the head was past, continuing its undulation into the water, and Bink was treading the massive neck, broad as a highway after the slender tail. Apparently, this dragon, serpent, or whatever was independent of air, it could keep its head submerged indefinitely. Yet how did it eat if it never let go of its tail? It couldn't be eating itself, could it? Maybe that had been its question for the magician. How could it let go of its tail so it could consume the idiots who walked along its length? No. If it had the answer to that, it would have gobbled up Bink as he passed.
"Jump, Bink!"
Chester called. Oops. Had the serpent changed its mind? Let go? And come to gobble? Bink looked back, but saw nothing special. Then he looked ahead and discovered that the body was twisting down and under the adjacent leg of the spiral. No more highway. He leaped ashore as his footing ended. Now he was at the outer rampart of the castle. He looked for the great doorway he had encountered on his first approach to this castle, back before Trent was king, and found a waterfall. A waterfall? How had that gotten here? He traced it upward and saw a ledge. The water issued from somewhere out of sight, to course down over the frame of the door. Was there an aperture behind the sheet of water? Bink did not relish getting wet here after traversing the whole moat dry, but he would have to look. He removed his clothing and set it aside so that it would not get soaked, then nudged cautiously into the waterfall. The water was cool, but not chill. There was a small airspace behind it. Then the wood facing of the door. He explored the surface with his hands, pushing here and there, but found no looseness anywhere. There was no entrance here. He backed out of the fall, shaking his head to clear it of drip. Where could he go from here? The ledge circled the castle, but he knew the wall was solid stone throughout. There would be no access to the interior. Nevertheless, Bink made the circuit, verifying his suspicion. No access. What now? He suffered a surge of anger. Here he was on the king's business. Why should he have to go through all this nonsense? The old gnome magician thought he was so clever, putting a maze around himself. Bink had just about had it with mazes. First the queen's, then the nickel-peed crevice, now this. But, at heart, Bink was a practical man. In due course, the pressure of his anger ceased, like the steam of a relaxing dragon. He came to look at the waterfall again. This was no mountain with natural drainage. The water had to be raised by mundane or magical means to an upper level, then poured out. Surely it was a circulatory system, drawn from the moat and returning to it. Could he swim in where the water was sucked up? No. Water could go where he could not, such as through a sieve. He could drown if his body got stuck in the water channel. Not worth the risk. The only other direction was up. Could he climb? Yes, he could. He now noted little handholds in the wood at the edge of the waterfall. "Here I come," he muttered. He climbed. As his head poked over the sill, he froze. There on the roof squatted a gargoyle. The water issued from its grotesque mouth. Then he realized that this monster, like the Ouroboros, could not be dangerous if he handled it properly. The gargoyle, assigned to water-spouting duty, would be unlikely to chase him. Bink clambered to the surface of the small roof. He surveyed the situation from this firmer footing. The gargoyle was about his own height, but it was mostly face. The body was so foreshortened as to represent no more than a pedestal. The head was so distorted that Bink could not tell whether it was man, animal, or other. Huge eyes bulged. The nose was like that of a horse. The ears flared out enormously, and the mouth took up fully a third of the face, with the water pouring out like a prolonged regurgitation. Behind the monster, the wall of the castle resumed. There were no handholds, and even if he could scale it, he saw only barred apertures above. No particular hope there. Bink contemplated the gargoyle. How had it gotten up here? It had no real hands or feet to use to climb the way Bink had. Was there a door behind it? That seemed reasonable. He would have to move the monster away from that door. But how? The thing had not attacked him, but its attitude might change if he molested it. The gargoyle was more massive than he. It might shove him right off the roof. Too bad he didn't have his sword to defend himself. That was with his clothing, back beside the moat. Should he climb back down to get it? No, he was sure that would not be wise. It would give away his intent. The gargoyle could move over and crunch his fingers as he ascended with the weapon. Maybe he could bluff it. "Move over, foul face. I am on a mission for the king." The gargoyle ignored him. That was another thing that was getting to Bink. Being ignored. "Move, or I'll move you myself." He stepped toward the monster. No reaction. How could he back down now? Trusting his talent to protect him, Bink moved in beside the gargoyle, staying clear of the river of water spouting from its mouth, and applied his hands to its surface. The grotesque face felt like stone, completely hard. It was heavy, too. Shove as he might, he could not budge it. The monster was defeating him, and it hadn't even noticed him. Then Bink had a bright idea. Sometimes creatures were vulnerable to their own specialties. The gargoyle's specialty was ugliness. Bink stood before it, straddling the river. "Hey, homely. Here's what you look like. He put his fingers in the corners of his mouth to stretch it wide while he bugged his eyes. The gargoyle reacted. It pursed its lips to funnel the water toward Bink. Bink jumped nimbly aside. "Nyet!" he yelled, puffing out his cheeks to make another ludicrous face. The monster shuddered with rage. It shot another blast of water at him. Bink was tagged by the fringe of it and almost washed off the ledge. This was, after all, a chancy business. He opened his mouth and stuck out his tongue. "Ah!" he cried, unable to form anything much better while holding the expression. The gargoyle was infuriated. Its mouth opened until it took up half the face. But with the opening that large, the water emerged at low pressure, dribbling down the ugly chin. Bink dived forward, directly into that mouth. He scrambled upstream against the slowly moving water and emerged into a reservoir tank within the castle. In a moment, he had stroked to the surface and climbed out. He was inside. But not yet safe. A cactus cat perched at the edge of the reservoir. It was about half Bink's height, with a normal feline face, but its fur was composed of thorns. On the ears, the thorns were very large and stiff, like slender spikes. But the cat's real weapons were on its front legs. Knife-like blades of bone projecting from the front, scintillatingly sharp. These obviously could not be wielded endwise like daggers, but would be devastating as slicers. The thorn fur was horizontally striped, green and brown, and this pattern carried over into the three tails. A pretty but dangerous creature. One that no cognizant person would pat casually on the head, saying, "Nice kitty." Was this another guardian of the castle, or merely a house guest? Cactus cats normally ran wild, slicing up cactus with their blades and feeding on the fermenting sap. Needle cactuses fought back, however, shooting their needles into anything that annoyed them, so they were natural enemies to the cactus cats. Encounters between the two were said to be quite something. But there was no cactus of any kind here. Maybe this was an animal soliciting an answer from the good magician. Bink tried to skirt it, but the cat moved lightly to the only apparent exit and settled there. So it seemed he would have to force the issue, regardless. Suddenly, Bink got mad. He had had enough of these obstructions. He was no mere supplicant. He was here on the king's business. "Cat, get out of my way," he said loudly. The animal began to snore. But Bink knew it would come awake instantly and violently if he tried to sneak past it. Cats were ornery that way. This creature was playing cat and mouse with him, and that made him madder yet. But what could he do? He was no needle cactus with hundreds of sliver thorns to launch. How could he strike at this insufferable cat? Needles. There were other missiles than needles. "Then pay the consequence," Bink snapped. He leaned over the reservoir and sliced his hand across its surface, scooping out a fierce splash of water. The droplets arced across the room and splattered against the wall beside the sleeping cat. The creature rose up with a screech of sheerest feline fury. Sparks radiated from its ears. Most cats hated water, other than small, tame amounts for drinking, and desert cats were enraged by it. The thing charged Bink, its four-limb blades gleaming. Bink scooped another volley of liquid at it. The cat leaped straight up in horror, letting the splash pass under. Oh, it was ecstatically angry now. "We can handle this two ways, Cactus," Bink said calmly, his hand ready by the water. "Either I can soak you down thoroughly, or you can stand and let me pass. Or any combination of the two." The cat snarled. It looked at Bink, then at the water. Finally, it affected loss of interest, in the manner of balked felines, and stalked to the side, all three tails standing stiffly. "Very good, Cactus," Bink said, "but a word to the cunning. If I were to be attacked on the way, I should simply have to grab my antagonist and plunge into the pool and drown him, whatever the mutual cost. That would be inconvenient, and I hope it does not become necessary." The cat pretended not to hear. It settled down again to sleep. Bink walked toward the door, affecting a nonchalance similar to that of the cactus cat, but was wary. Fortunately, he had bluffed it out. The cat did not move. Now he was past the hurdles. He explored the castle until he located the good magician Humphrey. The man was gnome-like, perched on top of 3 huge tomes so as to gain the elevation he needed to pour over a fourth. He was old, perhaps the oldest man in the land of Xanth, with skin wrinkled and mottled, but he was a fine and honest magician, and Bink knew him to be a kindly individual, under all his gruffness. "Magician!" Bink exclaimed, still irked by the challenge of entry. "Why don't you pay attention to who's visiting? I had to run your infernal gauntlet, and I'm not even coming as a supplicant. I'm on the king's business." Humphrey looked up, rubbing one reddish eye with a gnarled little hand.
"Oh, hello, Bink. Why haven't you visited me before this?"
"We were yelling across the moat. You never answered." Humphrey frowned.
"Why should I answer a transformed griffin who squawks in a manner that would make a real griffin blush? Why should I acknowledge the bellow of an ornery centaur? The one has no question, and the other doesn't want to pay for his. Both are wasting my time."
"So you were aware of us all the time?" Bink exclaimed, half angry, half admiring, with a little indefinable emotion left over. What a personality this was! He started to shout, "You let me struggle through the whole needless—"
"Needless, Bink. You come on a mission that will cost me an inordinate amount of time, and will threaten the welfare of Xanth itself. Why should I encourage you in such folly?
I don't need encouragement, Bink cried hotly. All I need is advice, because the king thought that was best. The good magician shook his head.
The king is a remarkably savvy customer. You need more than advice, Bink.
Well, all I need from you is advice.
You shall have it, and without charge. Forget this mission.
I can't forget this mission. I'm on assignment for the...
So you said. I did tell you that you needed more than advice. You're as ornery as your friends. Why didn't you leave that poor dragon alone?
Leave the poor Bink started indignantly. Then he laughed. You're some character, magician. Now stop teasing me and tell me why, since you obviously have been well aware of my progress, you did not let us into the castle the easy way.
Because I hate to be disturbed for minor matters. Had you been balked by my routine defenses, you could hardly have possessed the will to pursue your mission properly. But, as I feared, you persevered. What started as a minor diversion with a shapely ghost has become a serious quest, and the result is opaque even to my magic. I queried Beauregard on the matter, and he got so upset I had to rebuttal him before he had a nervous breakdown.
Beauregard? That was the bespectacled demon corked in a container, highly educated. Bink began to feel uncomfortable. What could so shake up a demon?
The end of Xanth,
Humphrey said simply. But all I'm looking for is the source of magic, Bink protested. I'm not going to do anything to harm Xanth. I love Xanth.
You weren't going to install the evil magician as king last time you were here,
Humphrey reminded him.
Your minor personal quests have a way of getting out of hand.
You mean this present mission is going to be worse than the last one? Bink asked, feeling both excited and appalled. He had only wanted to find his talent before. The magician nodded soberly.
So it would seem. I cannot fathom in what precise manner your quest will threaten Xanth, but am certain the risks are extraordinary.
Bink thought of giving up the quest and returning to Chameleon, ugly and sharp of tongue as she was at the moment, with Millie the non-ghost hovering near. Suddenly he became much more interested in the source of the magic of Xanth. Thanks for your advice. I'm going on.
Less hasty, Bink. That was not my magic advice. That was just common sense, for which I make no charge. I knew you would ignore it.
Bink found it hard at times not to get impatient with the good magician. Let's have your magic answer then.
And what do you proffer for payment?
Payment? Bink expostulated. This is
the king's business,
the magician finished.
Be realistic, Bink. The king is merely getting you out of his hair for a while, until your home life sweetens up. He can't have you tearing up his palace every time he tries to make out with the queen. That hardly warrants my waiver of fee.
Only a foolish man tried to argue with a magician whose talent was information. Bink argued. The king merely timed the mission conveniently. My job always has been to seek out the source of magic. It just took me a while to get around to it. It is important for the king to have this knowledge. Now that I'm actually on the quest, the authority of the king is behind it, and he can call on your resources if he chooses. You knew that when you helped make him king. Humphrey shook his head.
Trent has become arrogant in his power. He draws ruthlessly on the talents of others to forward his purposes.
Then he smiled.
In other words, he is exactly the kind of monarch Xanth needs. He does not plead or petition. He commands. I, as a loyal citizen, must support that exercise of power.
He glanced at Bink.
However capriciously it happens to be exercised. Thus my fee becomes forfeit to the good of Xanth. Though, in this case, I fear it is the bad of Xanth.
The capitulation was too sudden and too amiable. There had to be a catch. What is your answer, then?
What is your question?
Bink choked on a mouthful of air.
What
do I need for this quest? He spluttered.
Your quest cannot be successful unless you take a magician along.
Take a magician? Bink exclaimed. There are only 3 magician-class people in Xanth, and 2 of them are the king and queen. I can't... He broke off, realizing. You?
I told you this was going to cost me time,
Humphrey grumbled.
All my arcane researches interrupted. My castle mothballed. Because you can't wait a few days for your wife to finish her pregnancy and get sweet and pretty again.
You old rogue, Bink cried. You want to come.
I hardly made that claim,
the magician said sourly.
The fact is, this quest is too important to allow it to be bungled by an amateur. As well, the king understood when he sent you here. Since there is no one else of suitable expertise available, I am forced to make the sacrifice. There is no necessity, however, that I be gracious about it.
But you could have sought the source of magic any time. You didn't have to co-opt the quest right when I
co-opt nothing. It is your quest. I merely accompany you as an emergency resource.
You mean you're not taking over?
What do I want with leadership? I shall stick to my own business, leaving the pesky details of management and routine to you, until my resources are needed, which I trust will not be soon or often.
Now, Bink was uncertain how serious Humphrey was. Surely, a man who specialized in magical information would be seriously interested in the source of magic. But certainly the good magician liked his convenience and privacy, as his castle and mode of operation testified. Probably Humphrey was torn between desires for isolation and knowledge, so reacted negatively while doing what he deemed to be the right thing. No sense in aggravating the situation. The man would certainly be an incalculable asset on a quest of this nature. I am sorry to be the agent of such inconvenience to you, but glad to have your help. Your expertise is vastly greater than mine. Humphrey agreed, trying not to seem mollified.
Let's get on with it. Go tell the troll to let down the drawbridge for your companions.
There is one other thing, Bink said. Someone may be trying to kill me.
And you want to know who?
Yes. And why? I don't like...
That is not the king's business. It will have to be covered by a separate fee.
Oh. Just when Bink had begun to suspect there was a decent streak in the good magician, he had this confirmation of the man's mercenary nature. 1 year of service for the answer? Bink preferred to locate and deal with his enemy himself. Forget it, he said.
It is already forgotten,
Humphrey said graciously. Milled, Bink trekked downstairs, found the troll, and gave it the instruction. The brute winched down the bridge. Where the drawbridge mechanism was, Bink did not know, as it had not been apparent from the outside, and the troll stood in a chamber near the center of the castle. There had to be magical augmentation to connect what the troll did to what the bridge did. But it worked, and Chester and Crombie entered at last, emerging from a gate that opened from the center of the castle. How could there be an opening here, with no hole through the wall? The magician was evidently squandering a lot of magic here. Maybe some clever technician had brought a question and constructed this mechanism as a fee.
I knew you'd come through, Bink, the centaur said. What did the old gnome say about your quest?
He's coming with me. Chester shook his head.
You're in trouble.
The magician came downstairs to meet them.
So, you want to know your obscene talent? He said to the centaur. What fee do you offer the old gnome?
Chester was, for once, abashed.
I'm not sure Centaurs aren't supposed to... Aren't supposed to be wishy-washy?
Humphrey asked cuttingly. Chester just came along to give me a ride, Bink said, and fight dragons.
Bink will still need a ride, Humphrey said. Since I am now associated with this quest, it behooves me to arrange for it. I proffer you this deal. In lieu of the customary year's service for the answer, I will accept service for the duration of this quest.
Chester was startled.
You mean I do have a talent? A magic one? Indubitably.
And you know it already. What is it?
I do.
Then... But the centaur paused. I might figure it out for myself, if it was so easy for you to do. Why should I pay you for it? Why, indeed, the magician agreed.
But if I don't figure it out, and if Bink gets in trouble because he meets a dragon when I'm not there...
It would be nice. I would love to let you stew indefinitely in your dilemma, Humphrey said. But I am in a hurry, and Bink needs a ride, so I'll cut it short. Undertake the service I require in advance of my answer. If you fail to solve your talent yourself, I will tell you at the termination of the quest, or any prior time you so request. If you do solve it yourself, I will provide a second answer to whatever other question you may ask. Thus, you will in effect have two answers for the price of one. Chester considered momentarily.
Done, he agreed. I like adventure anyway.
The magician turned to Crombie. Now, you are directly in the king's service, so are committed for the duration. He has given you a fine form, but it lacks intelligible speech. I believe it would be better for you to be more communicative. Accordingly, meet another of my fee servitors, Grundy the Golem. A miniature man figure appeared, his whole height hardly the span of an ordinary man's hand. He seemed to have been formed from bits of string and clay and wood and other refuse, but he was animate. The Griffin looked at the Golem with a certain surprised contempt. One bite of that eagle's beak could sever all four appendages from the figure. "Squawk!" Crombie remarked. "Same to you, Birdbeak," the Golem said, without special emphasis, as if he didn't really care. "Grundy's talent is translation," the magician explained. "I shall assign him to render the soldier's griffin speech into human speech, so we can better understand him. He already understands us, as so many animals do, so no reverse translation is required. The Golem is small enough for any of us to carry without strain, so his transportation will be no problem. Bink will ride the centaur, and I will ride the griffin. That way, we shall make expeditious progress." And so, efficiently, it was arranged. The quest for the source of the magic of Xanth had begun. And so ends also Chapter 4. Which brings us to, of course, Chapter 5. All these voices, I'm telling you. So many different people. We have the magician. We have the centaur. We have the griffin. We have Bink. Of course, Bink is just my voice. That makes it so much easier. They are the little things that make me happy in life. But I like my voices. What can I say? Hope you guys are enjoying. And of course, here we go into the next chapter. Deep breath. Get a cough out. Get a stretch on. And here we go. Chapter 5 Gollum Heights. They stood outside the castle, across the moat, watching while the magician mothballed his residence. The Ouroboros and other creatures under fee had been granted leaves of absence and were already gone. Humphrey fumbled in his clothing, showing a large, heavy belt containing many pockets, and drew from this belt a closed vial or narrow bottle. He applied his thumbs to its cork until it popped free. Smoke swirled out, looming high into the sky. Then it coalesced into the largest moth Bink had ever imagined, with a wingspan that cast the entire castle into shadow. The creature flew up over the castle and dropped a ball. As the ball fell near the highest turret, it exploded. Gray-white streamers shot out in a huge sphere, drifting down to touch every part of the castle. Then they drew in tight, and suddenly the whole edifice was sheathed in a silky net and looked like a giant tent. A cold, bitter odor emanated from it, smelling vaguely disinfectant.
"There,"
Humphrey said with grudging satisfaction.
"That'll keep 100 years if it has to." 100 years?
Chester exclaimed.
Is that how long you figure this mission will take? Come on. We're wasting time,
the good magician grumped. Bink, astride the centaur, looked across at the griffin. What he means, Crombie, is that we need to know the direction of the source of magic. The mission should be accomplished in a few days with your help. The griffin squawked irritatingly. Well, why didn't the old fool say so? The golem translated promptly. He shared the griffin's back with the magician, as the two together massed barely half what Bink did.
Well spoken, soldier,
Chester muttered low. Crombie whirled, almost throwing off his riders. That way, Grundy said, pointing around in a continuous circle, his tiny arms settling nowhere.
Oh no,
Chester muttered.
His talent's on the blink again.
It is not malfunctioning,
Humphrey snapped.
You asked the wrong question.
Bink's brow furrowed. We had some trouble that way before. What is the right question?
It is your job to pursue this quest,
Humphrey said.
I must conserve my information for emergencies.
And he settled down comfortably amid the feathers of the griffin's back and closed his eyes. The good magician remained his taciturn self. He was out of the habit of helping anyone without his fee, even when he himself might benefit from such help. Now, Bink was on the spot again. He had to figure out how to make Crombie's talent work. Well, the magician snoozed. Before, in the Nickelpeed cleft, Crombie had fouled up because there had been no single direction for escape. Was that the case now? No single source for magic? If so, that would be very hard to locate. But the cynosure of this group was on him. He had to perform, and in a hurry. It was evident that the good magician had done him no particular favor by leaving the leadership of the quest to Bink. What is the most direct route to the source of magic? This time, the griffin's wing pointed down at an angle. So that was why there was no horizontal direction. The source was not across, but down. Yet, that was not much help. They couldn't dig down very far, very fast. They would have to get a person whose talent was magic tunneling, and that would mean delay and awkwardness. This group was already larger than Bink had anticipated. Better to find a natural route. Where is there an access to this source from the surface? Bink asked. The wing began to vibrate back and forth. The nearest one, Bink amended hastily. The wing stabilized, pointing roughly south.
The heart of the unexplored wilderness,
Chester said.
I should have known. Maybe I should take my answer now and quit.
Crombie squawked.
Birdbeak says if you take your stupid answer now, you can't quit, horse rear.
Chester swelled up angrily.
Birdbeak said that. You tell him for me he has bird droppings for brains and...
Easy, Bink cautioned the centaur. Crombie needs no translation for your words.
Actually, he called you an ass,
Grundy said helpfully.
I assume he meant your rear end, which is about as asinine as...
The griffin squawked again.
Oops, my error, the golem said. He referred to your front end.
Listen, bird brain,
Chester shouted.
I don't need your ignorant opinion. Why don't you take it and stuff it?
But Crombie was squawking at the same time. The two faced off aggressively. The centaur was bigger and more muscular than the griffin, but the griffin was probably the more deadly fighter, for he had the mind of a trained human soldier in the body of a natural combat creature.
Squawk!
Bink screamed. I mean, stop! The golem is just making trouble. Obviously, the word Crombie used was centaur. Isn't that so, Crombie? Crombie squawked affirmatively.
Spoil sport,
Crombie muttered, speaking for himself.
Just when things are getting interesting.
Never mind that, Bink said. Do you admit I was correct, Golem?
The centaur is an ass, front and rear,
Grundy said sullenly.
It depends on whether you are defining it intellectually or physically.
I think I will squeeze your big loud mouth into a small, silent ball,
Chester said, reaching for the golem.
You can't do that, mule face,
Grundy protested.
I'm on the dwarf's business.
Chester paused, seeing the good magician stir.
Whose business?
This midget's business,
Grundy said, gesturing back at Humphrey with a single stiffened finger. Chester looked at Humphrey, feigning perplexity.
Sir, how is it you accept such insults from a creature who works for you?
Oops,
the golem muttered, discovering the trap.
I thought he was asleep. The golem has no personal reality, Humphrey said. Therefore, his words carry no personal onus. One might as well get angry at a lump of clay. That's telling him, imp,
Grundy agreed, but he seemed chastened. Let's get on with our quest, Bink suggested, as the good magician closed his eyes again. Privately, He wondered how it was that an unreal construct, the golem, could be in fee to the magician. Grundy must have asked a question and had an answer. But what could have motivated this magical entity to seek such information? Then Bink had a minor inspiration as they trekked south. Crombie, someone or something has been trying to eliminate me. I think that's why the dragon came after us. Can you point out where that enemy is?
Smock!
Crombie agreed. He whirled, and the good magician wobbled on his back, but did not wake up. When the wings stabilized, it pointed, the same direction as it had for the source of magic.
It seems,
Chester said gravely,
that it is your mission your enemy opposes. Does that affect your attitude?
Yes, Bink said. It makes me twice as determined as before. Though he remembered that the sword had attacked him before he set out on this quest. Had his enemy anticipated him? That would be grim news indeed, implying more than ordinary strategy or magic. Let's get on with it. Near the magician's castle, the terrain was fairly quiet, but as they penetrated the wilderness, it changed. High brush grew up, obscuring the view, and as they passed it, there was a static discharge from the foliage that made hair and fur and feathers and string stand out eerily from them. Eerily from their bodies. Overlooking this brush was an antenna, orienting unerringly on the party. Bink had never gotten close enough to one of these things to discover exactly what it was, and did not propose to start now. Why did these antennae watch so closely, yet take no action? Sweat gnats came, making them all miserable until Humphrey woke, brought out a tiny vial, and opened it. Vapor emerged and spread, engulfing the gnats. Then it suddenly sucked back into its bottle, carrying the gnats with it.
Misty was due for feeding anyway,
the good magician explained, putting away the vial. He offered no further explanation, and no one had the nerve to inquire. Again, Humphrey slept.
Must be nice being a magician,
Chester said.
He's got the answer to all his problems, in one bottle or another.
Must be acquisitions from prior fees, Bink agreed. Then they blundered into a patch of cur spurs. The things were all over their legs, itching incessantly. There was only one way to get rid of such a burr. It had to be banished by a curse. The problem was, no particular curse could be used twice in a day. Each had to be different. Humphrey was not pleased to be awakened yet again. This time, it seemed he had no solution in the vial.
"By the beard of my great-uncle Humbug, begone!"
the good magician said, and the burr he addressed fell off, stunned.
"By the snout of a sick sea serpent, begone!"
And another dropped. Chester was more direct, for several burrs were tangled in his beautiful tail.
To the grave, you pickle face! I'll stomp you flat as a nickel-peed's nickel. Out, out, damned burr!
And 3 burrs fell overwhelmed. "Leave me," Bink said, envying the imagination of the others. "Go itch a dragon." And his burrs, too, started falling, though not so readily as those conked by the harder-hitting curses of the others. Bink just didn't have the touch. Crombie, however, was in trouble. Griffins were not native to this particular region of Xanth, and the burrs evidently didn't comprehend his squawks. Then the golem started translating, and they fell in droves.
"By the bloody mouths of a field of wild snapdragons, drop your ugly purple posteriors into the nearest stinking privy sideways. If your faces were flowers, you'd poison the whole garden. Jam your peppery pink rootlets up your—"
The golem paused, amazed.
"Is that possible? I don't think I can translate it."
But the curse burrs comprehended, and suddenly the griffin's bright feathers were free of them. No one could curse like a soldier. Still, it was impossible to avoid all the burrs in this area, and by the time they escaped it, their curses had become extremely far-fetched. Sometimes 2 or even 3 curses had to be expended to make a single burr let go. By this time, they were hungry. There was nothing like a good bout of cursing to work up an appetite.
"You know this area?"
Chester said to the magician before he could fall asleep again.
"Where is there something to eat?"
"Don't bother me with details,"
Humphrey snapped.
"I brought my own food, as you would have done too, had you proper foresight."
He opened another vial. This time, the vapor emerged to coalesce into a layered cake, complete with icing. The magician took this from the air, broke out a perfect wedge-shaped slice, and ate that while the remainder of the cake dissolved, misted, and flowed back into its bottle. "I realize we were remiss in not packing food for the journey," Bink said. "You don't suppose you might share some of that this one time?"
"Why should I suppose anything like that?"
Humphrey inquired curiously. "Well, we are hungry, and it would facilitate." The magician burped.
"Go find your own slop, freeloader,"
the golem translated. It occurred to Bink that the good magician was not as congenial a companion as the evil magician had been, the last time he had braved the wilderness of Xanth. But he well knew that appearances could be deceptive. Crombie squawked.
"Birdbeak says there should be some fruit trees around. He'll point them out."
And the griffin did his thing, pointing the direction. In a moment, they spied a giant fruit cup. The plant was the shape of an open bowl, filled to overflowing with assorted fruits. The party ran joyfully up to it, and startled, the fruits erupted upward, filling the air with color. "Oh no! They're winged fruits!" Bink exclaimed. "We should have sneaked up on them. Why didn't you warn us, Crombie?"
"You didn't ask, fathead,"
the golem retorted.
"Catch them!"
Chester cried, jumping and reaching high to snatch an apple out of the air. Bink, half dislodged, hastily dismounted. A ripe peach hovered for a moment, getting its bearings. Bink leaped at it, catching it in one hand. The wings fluttered frantically as it tried to escape, then gave up. They were leaves, green and ordinary, adapted to this special purpose. He stripped them off ruthlessly so his food could not escape, and went after the next. He tripped over something and fell flat, missing a bobbing pomegranate. Angrily, he looked at the obstacle that had thwarted him. It was another of the ubiquitous mounds of fresh earth. This time, he got up and stomped it absolutely flat. Then he dashed on after more fruit. Soon he had a small collection of fruits: apple, peach, plum, 2 pears, of course, several grapes, and 1 banana. The last, flying on monstrous vulture-like wing leaves, had given him a terrible struggle. But it was delicious. Bink did not feel entirely easy about consuming such fruit, because it seemed too much like living creatures. But he knew the wings were merely a magic adaptation to enable the plants to spread their seeds more widely. Fruit was supposed to be eaten. It wasn't really conscious or feeling. Or was it? Bink put that thought from his mind and looked about. They were on the verge of a forest of standing deadwood. Humphrey came awake.
"I suffer misgivings,"
he volunteered.
"I don't want to have to waste my magic ferreting out what killed those trees. We'd better go around."
What's the good of being a magician if he doesn't use your magic?
Chester demanded testily.
"I must conserve my magic rigorously for emergency use,"
Humphrey said.
"These are mere nuisances we have faced so far, not worthy of my talent."
You tell him, twerp,
the golem agreed. Chester looked unconvinced, but retained too much respect for the magician to make further issue of it.
It's getting on in the afternoon,
he remarked.
Where's a good place to spend the night?
Crombie stopped and whirled so vigorously he almost dislodged his riders.
"Humph!"
Humphrey exclaimed, and the golem dutifully translated.
You blundering aviary feline, get your catty feet on the ground.
The griffin's head rotated entirely around until the deadly eyes and beak pointed back.
Squawk!
Crombie said with authority. The golem did not translate, but seemed cowed. Crombie completed his maneuver and pointed a slightly new direction.
That's not far off the track. We'll go there,
Chester decided, and no one contradicted him. Their route skirted the dead forest, and this was fortuitous because there were few other hazards here. Whatever had killed the forest had also wiped out most of the magic associated with it, good and evil. Yet Bink developed a mounting curiosity about the huge trees that spied to the side. There were no marks upon them, and the grass beneath was luxuriant because of the new light let down. This suggested that the soil had not been poisoned by any monster. Indeed, a few new young shoots were rising, beginning the long task of reforesting the forest. Something had struck and killed and departed without other trace of its presence. To distract himself from the annoyance of the unanswerable riddle, Bink addressed the golem. Grundy, if you care to relate it, what was your question to the magician?
Me? The golem asked, amazed. You have interest in me?
Of course I do, Bink said. You're He'd been about to say person, but remembered the golem was technically not a person. An entity, he finished, somewhat lamely. You have consciousness, feelings.
No feelings, Grundy said. I am just a construct of string and clay and wood, animated by magic. I perform as directed, without interest or emotion.
Without interest or emotion? That hardly seemed true. You seem to experience a personal involvement just now, when I expressed interest in you.
Did I? It must have been a routine emulation of human reaction. I have to perform such emulations in the course of my translation service.
Bink was not convinced, but did not challenge this. If you have no interest in human affairs, why did you come to the good magician? What did you ask him?
I asked him how I could become real, the golem said.
But you are real. You're here, aren't you?
Take away the spell that made me, and I'd be nothing but a minor pile of junk. I want to be real the way you are real. Real without magic.
Real without magic. It made sense after all. Bink remembered how he himself had suffered, as a youth, thinking he had no magic talent. This was the other face of the problem. The creature who had no reality apart from magic. And what was the answer?
Care.
What?
Care, dumbbell.
Care?
Care.
That's all.
All.
All the answer?
All the answer, stupid.
And for that, you serve a year's labor?
You think you have a monopoly on stupidity?
Bink turned to the good magician, who seemed to have caught up on his sleep, but remained blithely silent. How can you justify charging such a fee for such an answer?
I don't have to,
Humphrey said.
No one is required to come to the grasping old gnome for information.
But anyone who pays a fee is entitled to a decent answer, Bink said, troubled.
The golem has a decent answer. He doesn't have a decent comprehension.
Well, neither do I, Bink said. Nobody could make sense of that answer. The magician shrugged.
Maybe he asked the wrong question.
Bink turned to Chester's human portion. Do you call that a fair answer?
Yes,
the centaur said. I mean, the one word. Care. Nothing else for a whole year's service.
Yes.
You think it's worth it? Bink was having trouble getting through.
Yes.
You'd be satisfied with that answer for your question? Chester considered.
I don't think that answer relates.
So you wouldn't be satisfied?
No. I'd be satisfied if that were my answer. I just don't believe it is. I am not a golem, you see.
Bink shook his head in wonder. I guess I'm part golem then. I don't think it's enough.
You're no golem,
Grundy said.
you aren't smart enough.
Some diplomacy. But Bink tried again. Chester, can you explain that answer to us?
No, I don't understand it either.
But you said...
I said I thought it was a fair answer. Were I a golem, I would appreciate its reference, its relevance. This is certainly more likely than the notion that the good magician would fail to deliver in full measure.
Bink remembered how Humphrey had told the Manticora that he had a soul, in such a manner that the creature was satisfied emotionally as well as intellectually. It was a convincing argument. There must be some reason for the obscurity of the answer for the golem. But oh, what frustration until that reason became clear. Near dusk, they spied a house. Crombie's talent indicated that this was the residence for the night. The only problem was the size of it. The door was 10 feet tall.
It is the domicile of a giant, or an ogre,
Humphrey said, frowning.
An ogre, Bink repeated. We can't stay there. He'd have us all in his pot in a moment, and the fire high, Chester agreed. Ogres consider human flesh a delicacy.
Crombie squawked.
The idiot claims his fool talent is never mistaken,
Grundy reported. Yes, but remember what his talent doesn't cover, Bink said. We asked for a good place to spend the night. We didn't specify that it had to be safe.
I dare say a big pot of hot water is as comfortable a place to relax as any, Chester agreed. Until it becomes too hot. Then the bath becomes...
I suppose I'll have to expend some of my valuable magic,
Humphrey complained.
It's too late to go wandering through the woods in search of alternate lodging.
He brought out yet another little stoppered bottle and pulled out the cork. It was an ornery cork, as corks tended to be, and gave way only grudgingly, so the process took some time. Isn't that a demon container? Bink asked, thinking he recognized the style. Some bottles were solider than others, and more carefully crafted, with magical symbols inscribed. Shouldn't you... The magician paused.
He says he was just about to, nitwit,
the golem said.
Believe it if you will.
The magician scraped a pentacle in the dirt, sat the bottle in it, and uttered an indecipherable incantation. The cork popped out, and the smoky demon issued, coalescing into the bespectacled entity Bink recognized as Beauregard. The educated demon didn't even wait for the question.
You routed me out for this, old man. Of course it's safe. That ogre's a vegetarian. It's your mission that's unsafe. I didn't ask you about the mission, Humphrey snapped. I know it's unsafe. That's why I'm along. It is not like you to indulge in such foolishness, especially at the expense of your personal comfort,
Beauregard continued, pushing his spectacles back along his nose with one finger.
Are you losing your marbles at last? Getting senile? Or merely attempting to go out in a blaze of ignominy? Begone, infernal spirit. I will summon you when I need your useless conjectures.
Beauregard shook his head sadly, then dissipated back into the bottle. That's another feeling spirit, Bink said uneasily. Do you have to coop him up like that? In such a little bottle?
No one can coop a demon, the magician said shortly. Besides, his term of service is not yet up.
At times, it was hard to follow the man's logic. But you had him when I first met you, more than a year ago.
He had a complex question.
Demon of information, who answers the questions you get paid fees for, has to pay you for answers? Humphrey did not respond. Bink heard a faint booming laughter and realized after a moment that it was coming from the demon's bottle. Something was certainly funny here, but not humorous.
We'd better move in before it gets dark,
Chester said, eyeing the ogre's door somewhat dubiously. Bink would have liked to explore the matter of the demon further, but the centaur had a point. They stepped up to the door. It was a massive portal, formed of whole tree trunks of hewn ironwood, scraped clean of bark and bound together by several severed predator vines. Bink marveled at this. Unrusted ironwood could be harvested only from freshly felled trees, and not even a magic axe could cut those very well. And what monster could blithely appropriate the deadly vines for this purpose? The vines normally used their constrictive power to crush their prey, and they were killingly strong. Chester knocked resoundingly. There was a pause while the metallic echoes faded. Then slow thuds approached from inside. The door wrenched open with such violence that the ironwood hinges grew hot, and the suction of air drew the centaur forward a pace. Light burst out blindingly, and the ogre stood there in terrible silhouette. It stood twice Bink's height, dwarfing even the monstrous door, and its body was thick in proportion. The limbs carried knots of muscle like the gnarly boles of trees. "Roar!" it boomed. "He says, what the hell is this bad smell?" the golem translated.
Bad smell?
Chester cried.
He's the one who smells.
It was true. The ogre seemed not to believe in washing or in cleansing magic. Dirt was caked on his flesh, and he reeked of rotting vegetation. But we don't want to spend the night outside, Bink cautioned. Crombie squawked. "Birdbeak says let's get on with it, slowpokes."
Birdbeak would,
Chester grumbled. The ogre grunted.
Stoneface says that's what he's sniffing. A putrid griffin.
The griffin stood tall and angry, half spreading his brilliant wings as he squawked.
How'd you like that problem corrected by an amputation of your schnozzle?
Grundy translated. The ogre swelled up even more massively than before. He growled.
Me grind you head to make me bread,
the golem said. Then there was a melody of squawks and growls, with the golem happily carrying both parts of the dialogue.
Come outside and repeat that, numbskull. Come into me house, you beat mouse. Me break you bone upon me dome. You break your dome just trying to think,
Grombie squawked. Do all ogres speak in rhyming couplets? Bink asked when there was a pause to replenish the reservoirs of invective. Or is that just the golem's invention?
That little twit not have the wit,
the golem said, then reacted angrily.
Who's a twit, you frog-faced
Ogres vary, as do other creatures,
Humphrey cut in smoothly.
This one does seem friendly.
Friendly? Bink exclaimed.
For an ogre, we'd better go in.
Me test you metal in me kettle,
the ogre growled, via the golem. But the griffin nudged on in, and the ogre gave grudging way. The interior was close and gloomy, as befitted the abode of a monster. The blinding light that had manifested when the door first opened was gone. Evidently, the proprietor had charged up a new torch for the occasion, and it had already burned out. Dank straw was matted on the floor, stalked cordwood lined the walls, and a cauldron bubbled like volcanic mud over a fire blazing in a pit in the center of the room. There seemed to be, however, no piles of bone. That, at least, was encouraging. Bink had never before heard of a vegetarian ogre, but the demon Beauregard surely knew his business. Bink realized that the constant threats were mostly bluffs, found himself embarrassed to be imposing on the good-natured, for an ogre, monster. "What is your name?" he inquired.
You lunch, me crunch.
Apparently, the brute had not understood. "My name's Bink. What's your name?"
Me have hunch, you not know crunch.
The ogre dipped a hairy, grimy mitt into the boiling cauldron, fished about, grabbed, withdrew a gooey fistful, plunked it into a gnarly wooden bowl, which he shoved at Bink.
Drink, Bink.
He means his name is Crunch,
Chester said, catching on.
He's offering you something to eat. He doesn't distinguish between meals. All food is lunch.
Oh. Thank you, Crunch, Bink said awkwardly. You lunch, me crunch. Now it made sense. An offer of food, an answer to a question, rather than a threat. He accepted the glop. The ogre served the others similarly. His huge paw seemed immune to the heat. Bink looked at his portion dubiously. The stuff was too thick to pool, too thin to pick up, and despite its bubbling heat, it hardly seemed dead yet. It was a deep purple hue, with green excrescences. It smelled rather good, actually, though there was a scalded fly floating in it. Chester sniffed his serving appreciatively.
Why, this is purple bouillon with green nutwood. A phenomenal delicacy. But it requires a magic process to extract the bouillon juice. And only a nutty green elf can procure nutwood. How did you come by this?
The ogre smiled. The effect was horrendous, even in the gloom.
Me have elf, work for pelf,
the golem translated. Then Crunch lifted a log from his stack and held it over the cauldron. He twisted one hand on each end, and the wood screwed up like a wet towel. A thin stream of purple liquid fell from it into the cauldron. When the log was dry, the ogre casually ripped it into its component cords and tossed it into the fire, where it flared up eagerly. Well, that was one way to burn cordwood. Bink had never before witnessed such a feat of brute strength. Rather than comment, he fished out the fly, dipped a finger into the cooling pudding, brought out a creamy glob, and put it gingerly to his mouth. It was delicious. "This is the best food I ever ate," he exclaimed, amazed.
You say that, Bink. You think it stink,
Crunch growled, flattered. Crombie squawked as he sampled his bowl.
You may stink. This is great,
the golem translated. Crunch, highly pleased by the double compliment, served himself a glob by dumping a bubbling fistful directly into his gaping maw. He licked off his fingers, then took another glob. As the others finished their helpings, the ogre served them more with the same hand. No one saw fit to protest. After all, what magic germs could survive that heat? After the repast, they settled on the straw for the evening. The others seemed satisfied to sleep, but Bink was bothered by something. In a moment, he identified it. Crunch. Among our kind, we offer some return service for hospitality. What can we do for you to repay this fine meal and lodging?
Say, that's right, Chester agreed. You need some wood chopped or something?
That no good. Have plenty wood,
the ogre grunted. He smashed one fist down on a log, and it splintered into quivering fragments. He obviously needed no help there. Crombie squawked.
Birdbeak says he can point out where anything is. What do you want, Stoneface? Want sleep, you creep,
Crunch mumbled. Not until we do you some service.
Take heed, no need.
Crunch closed one fist on a handful of straw, squeezed, and when he let go, the straw had fused into one spindly stick. The ogre used this to pick at his gross teeth. Chester argued caution for once.
We can't force a service on him he doesn't want.
Maybe he doesn't know he wants it, Bink said. We must honor the code.
You sure are a stubborn lout,
Grundy said, for once speaking for himself.
I stir up trouble.
It's a matter of principle, Bink said uncertainly. Crombie, can you point out where the thing Crunch desires is? The Griffin squawked affirmatively, spun about, stirred up the straw, and pointed at the good magician Humphrey, nodding in the corner, one piece of straw straddling his head.
Forget it,
Humphrey snapped sleepily.
I am not available for consumption.
But he's a vegetarian, Bink reminded him. It can't be that he wants to eat you. Maybe he wants to ask you a question.
Not for one measly night's lodging. He'd have to serve me for a year.
We have no question, no suggestion,
the ogre grunted.
It does seem we're forcing something unwanted on our host,
Chester said, surprisingly diplomatic. That log twisting and straw squeezing and wood splintering had evidently impressed the centaur profoundly. The ogre was clearly the strongest creature this party had encountered. There is something Crunch wants, even if he doesn't know it himself, Bink said. It is our duty to locate it for him. No one argued, though he was sure they all wished he would drop the subject. Crombie, maybe it isn't the magician he wants, but something on the magician. Exactly where did you point? Crombie squawked with tired resignation. He pointed again. Bink lined up his own finger, tracing the point. There, he said. Something in his crotch. Then he paused, abashed. His jacket, maybe. But the magician, tired, had fallen asleep. His only answer was a snore.
Oh, come on, Grundy said. I'll check it out.
And he scrambled up on the magician, climbing inside his jacket. I don't think, Bink said, startled by this audacity.
There's your problem,
the golem said from inside the jacket.
It must be this.
He emerged, clasping a vial in both arms. For him, it was a heavy weight.
That's the demon bottle,
Chester said.
Don't fool with.
But Grundy was already prying out the cork. Bink dived for him, but as usual, was too late. The cork was not ornery this time. It popped off cleanly as Bink grabbed the bottle.
Now you've done it,
Chester exclaimed.
If Humphrey wakes.
Bink was left holding the bottle as the demon coalesced, unbound by any magic inscription or incantation.
Somebody make
Bink stammered. Beauregard firmed, standing with a huge tome tucked under one arm. He peered at Bink beneath his spectacles.
A pentacle?
The demon finished.
I think not.
What have I done? Bink moaned. Beauregard waved negligently with his free hand.
You have done nothing, Bink. It was the foolish golem.
But I set him in motion.
Perhaps, but do not be concerned. Rather consider yourself as the instrument of fate. Know that neither the bottle nor the pentacle constrained me. I but honored these conventions to please the magician, to whom I owed professional courtesy. The agreement was that I should serve in this capacity of reserve informant until circumstances should free me, by the ordinary rules of demon control.
that chance has now occurred, as it was fated. A genuinely bound demon would have escaped, so I am free to go. I thank you for that accident, and now I depart." He began to fade. "Wait!" Bink cried. "At least answer this nice ogre's question." Beauregard firmed again. "He has no question. He only wants to sleep. Ogres need plenty of rest, or they lose their meanness." But Crombie's talent indicated, "Oh, that. Technically there is something, but it is not a conscious desire." "It will do," Bink said. He had not realized that ogres could have unconscious desires. "Tell us what it is before you go." "He wants to know whether he should take a wife," the demon said. The ogre growled.
"What kind of life, if me have wife?"
the golem said. "Now, that's interesting," Beauregard said. "A golem, serving fee for an answer he cannot comprehend."
"Who could make sense of a one-word answer?"
Grundy demanded. "Only a real creature," Beauregard replied. "That's the point. He's not real," Bink said. "He wants to know how to become real." Beauregard turned to the centaur. "And you want to know your talent? I could tell you, of course, but you would then be in fee to me, and neither of us want that." "Why don't you just answer the ogre's question and go?" Bink asked, not quite trusting this too knowledgeable free demon. "I cannot do that directly, Bink. I am a demon. He would not accept my answer, rational though it would be. He is of an irrational species, like yourself. You must answer him." "Me? Bink broke off, not wanting to comment on his present problem with Chameleon. "I spoke in the plural," Beauregard said, a bit condescendingly. "You and Chester and Crombie should discuss your relations with your respective females, and the consensus will provide the ogre with the perspective he needs." He considered. In fact, in that context, my own comment might become relevant." And he settled down on the straw with them. There was a silence. How did you... That is... There is a lady ogre? Ogress in mind? Bink asked Crunch. The ogre responded with a volley of growls, snorts, and gnashings of yellow teeth. It was all the golem could do to keep up with the translation, but Grundy rose to the occasion and spouted at the height of his form.
"One lovely bleak morning during the thunderstorm warning, me wandered far out beyond hail of a shout. Me was in a good mood, just looking for food. No creature stirred this far from home. No dragon, no monster, not even a gnome. Me entered a forest huge and tall. The trees were so big, me seemed small. The way was so tangled, no walker could pass, but it opened like magic, a lovely crevasse, with nyctopedes and more delights, and stagnant water, rich with lights. And me tramped up to a hidden castle, with shroud for flag and scalp for tassel. The wind blew by it with lovely moans, and all the timbers were giant bones. At entrance slept little dragon called Puck, guarding what left meself awestruck. A fountain packed with purple mud, spouting gouts of bright red blood. Me stared so long me stood in doze, and me mouth watered so hard it drooled on me toes. But me knew such enchantment could be complete the moment me yielded and started to eat. Me wanted to see what further treasure offered itself for the hero's pleasure. And in the center, in a grimy sack, lay a wonderful ogress stretched on a rack. She had hair like beak of carrion, wonderfully foul. She stench was so strong, me wanted to howl. Me thought me sick with worm and gut, but me knew it was love for that splendid slut. Me smashed she in face with hairy fist, which is ogre way of making tryst. Then me picked she up by she left leg, and dragged she away, me golden egg. Then whole castle came awake, goblin and troll and green mandrake. They celebrated the union of hero and cute by pelting we with rotten fruit. But on way out we tripped a spell that sounded alarm where evil fiends dwell. They had put castle to sleep for 100 years, these fiends who hated ogres' rears. They fired a spell of such terrible might, we had to flee it in a fright. We dodged it every way we could, but it caught we good in midst of wood. As it struck me cried, me crunch no bone, and it thought we ogres moth had flown. It dissipated in such mighty flash, the whole near forest was rendered trash. Now me crunch no bones, lest fiends of lake learn, they curse have made mistake. Me not want them throw another curse, maybe like the first, maybe worse. Me love lies stunned within the wood, sleeping away she maidenhood. But one thing now gives me pause, she never did make much applause. All me want to know is this, should me leave or fetch the miss?
The others sat in silence for a time following this remarkable recital. At last, Crombie squawked.
That was a considerable adventure and romance,
Grundy said for him.
Well, I can appreciate the fetching qualities of your lady friend. I must say from my own experience that all females are infernal creatures, whose primary purpose in life is to deceive, entrap, and make miserable the males. Therefore...
The ogre's grunt interrupted the griffin in mid-squawk.
Hee hee hee, hee hee hee.
Grundy translated, interrupting himself.
Me fetch she instantly.
Chester smiled.
Despite my friend's recommendation, I must offer a note of caution. No matter how badly the filly nags the stallion, and how unreasonable she normally seems, there comes a time when she births her first foal. Then the dam no longer has much interest in.
She no nag, that is snag.
Crunch growled, disappointed. But, in due course, Bink said, she is bound to return to normal, often with extremely cutting wit. In any event, I should think some nagging is better than no nagging. So why not rouse your beauty and give her a proper chance? She may make your life completely miserable. The ogre's eyes lighted like torches. I must concur, Beauregard said. This conversation has been a most intriguing insight into the condition of human, animal, and ogre emotions. What is nagging to humans is applause to ogres. This will do nicely to conclude my dissertation. Your what? Bink asked. My doctoral thesis on the fallibilities of intelligent life on the surface of Xanth, Beauregard explained. I sought information from the human magician Humphrey, and he assured me that a term of service in his bottle would provide me the insights I require, since a person's nature may best be gauged through the questions he considers most vital. This has indeed been the case, and I am now virtually assured of my degree. That will qualify me to form permanent liaison with my chosen demoness, who would seem to be worth the effort. This causes me to experience a certain demonic exhilaration. Therefore, I present each of you with a small token gleaned from my researches. The demon turned to Chester. I prefer not to inform you of your magic talent directly, for the reason given above, but will provide a hint. It reflects the suppressed aspect of your character. Because you, like most centaurs, have disbelieved in magic among your kind, whole aspects of your personality have been driven as if it were underground. When you are able to expiate this conditioning, your talent will manifest naturally. Do not waste a year of your life for the answer of the good magician. Just allow yourself more self-expression. He turned to Crombie. You cannot escape your fate in this manner. When you return from this quest, if you return, Sabrina will trap you into an unhappy marriage, unless you arrange for a more suitable commitment elsewhere before you see her. Therefore, enjoy yourself now. Have your last fling, and do not be concerned for the morrow, for it will be worse than today. Yet marriage is not, after all, for you, a fate worse than death. You will know that when you do face death. He left the crestfallen griffin and oriented on the golem. The meaning of the magician's answer to you is this. People care. Inanimate objects do not. Only when you experience genuine feelings that preempt your logic will you be real. You can achieve this height only if you work at it. But beware, for the emotions of living things are in many cases extremely uncomfortable. He turned to Crunch. I say to you, Ogre, go fetch your lady. She sounds like a worthy companion for you. In every respect, a truly horrendous bitch. And Crunch was so moved, he almost blushed. Beauregard turned to Bink. I have never been able to fathom your magic, but I feel its operation now. It is extremely strong, but that which you seek is infinitely stronger. If you persist, you run the risk of being destroyed, and of destroying those things you hold most dear. Yet you will persist, and so I extend my condolence. Until we meet again. He faded out. The members of the remaining circle exchanged glances.
Let's go to sleep,
Chester said. That seemed like the best idea of the evening.
And so we have reached the end of our second chapter of the evening, and so also the end of our stream for the evening.
I hope you have all enjoyed this recitation of chapters 4 and 5 of The Source of Magic with the demon Beauregard, Grundy the Golem, and Crunch the Ogre, along with our usual party of miscreants, Bink, the good magician Humphrey, Chester, and Crombie. It's fun to be able to do some of these additional accents for these things as they come in. It's just keeping them straight in your head as you go through. So, as always, thank you to all of you. Greatest gift that you can give to a streamer is the gift of your time. I appreciate that you guys gave me the gift of yours this evening. Hope you guys did enjoy the couple of chapters of The Source of Magic this evening. Should be back again tomorrow. We'll be playing Kingmaker, a Pathfinder adventure on Foundry VTT. And, of course, Thursday, as long as all goes well, back for Stompy Mech Night. This Saturday, it looks like we're going to have a scrimmage for comp, so I will probably not be streaming. If I'm not, I'll stream Sunday instead. I hope you guys all have yourselves a wonderful and fantastic evening, and I hope to see you guys all again very soon. Good night, everybody.